You know, you could be completely excused for thinking that English spelling was actually invented by a trickster god.
Oh, absolutely.
And not just any trickster god, but
Yeah.
like one with a particularly cruel streak. Because when you actually sit down and look at the words we use every single day, it feels like a practical joke.
Right. It really does.
I mean, why doesn't Sue rhyme with, though? Why doesn't cough rhyme with bow?
Yeah, the rules seem completely arbitrary.
They do. And why are there just so many letters taking up space on the page, doing absolutely zero work?
It is baffling when you lay it out like that, but I can reassure you, there is no trickster god involved here. I am sure. There are actual concrete reasons for why things are the way they are. Our spelling isn't some cosmic joke. It's basically a fossilized record of our history.
I really want to believe that, but when I look at a word like hiccup, it tests my faith in logic.
Fair enough. To see the logic, we really have to establish one foundational rule for this deep dive, and that is word plus time equals change.
Word plus time equals change. Okay.
Exactly. That is the engine driving everything we are going to explore today. You see, our spelling basically locked into place centuries ago, but our mouths kept moving.
Right.
How we spoke kept evolving, and it left these silent letters behind, like footprints in the mud.
But wait, why did the spelling lock into place while the pronunciation just kept moving?
Well, the primary culprit was the printing press. When William Caxton brought the printing press to England in the late 1400s, English spelling was incredibly fluid.
Oh, I bet.
People spelled phonetically based on their own regional dialects. But the printing press demanded standardization. You needed one way to spell a word so it could be distributed widely.
Right. I mean, you can't have 5 different spellings of the same word in one printed book.
Exactly. But here is the catch. Caxton brought over Flemish typesetters to run these presses.
Oh, wow.
And many of them barely spoke English.
That sounds like a disaster.
It definitely caused issues. They were making best guesses, sometimes using Dutch spelling conventions for English words, which, by the way, is actually how the silent H got permanently inserted into the word ghost.
Wait, really? Just a Dutch typesetter guessing?
Pretty much. And on top of that, they were standardizing the language during a period of massive phonetic upheaval, right in the middle of what linguists call the Great Vowel Shift.
Okay, so the timing was just terrible.
Thorough timing. So they took a snapshot of a moving target, froze it in ink, and as the spoken language continued to change over the next few centuries, the written word stayed exactly the same.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why specific letters went silent, we really have to look at where English got its vocabulary.
Right.
The way I'm looking at it, English is basically a computer operating system that downloaded a massive amount of foreign software. But it entirely lacked the phonetic hardware to run certain lines of code.
That's a great analogy.
Like, it borrowed thousands of words from other languages, but native speakers physically resisted pronouncing certain foreign sound clusters. They just bypassed the incompatible code entirely.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Those incompatible lines of code are sound combinations so uncommon in native English that speakers they bypass them. Take words of Greek origin.
Okay.
There are very few native words in English that begin with the M consonant cluster. So when a Greek root like nem arrives via Latin in the 1600s, which gives us words like mnemonic, we hit a hardware compatibility issue.
You mean the M and the N right next to each other at the start of a word?
Yes. The M was actually pronounced before the N in mnemonic as recently as the late 1800s.
Really? Just M mnemonic?
Yes, but it requires an awkward reset of the nasal passage right at the start of a breath. It wasn't until relatively recently that English speakers just dropped the M completely.
They just collectively decided it wasn't worth the effort.
Exactly.
And it's not just the MN combination. I mean, we see the exact same hardware failure with the Greek PS combination, words like psychology, psalm, or pseudo.
Oh, yes.
The P is totally silent for us. But there is this hilarious historical anecdote from over 100 years ago. An editor of the Oxford English Dictionary actually demanded that English speakers restore the P in psychology.
Yes, he did.
He wanted everyone to match the French and the German pronunciations, where they still sound out the P right before the S.
He was a purist. He was trying to force a phonetic correction long after the public had already moved on.
And English speakers completely ignored him. They kept right on dropping the P.
Because language is ultimately democratic. You cannot dictate pronunciation to millions of people who have already found a more efficient way to speak.
Right.
And we see the exact same democratic rejection with the PN cluster. Words like pneumatic and pneumonia. They came through Latin from the Greek word for wind or breath. Modern French speakers still pronounce the initial P, but English speakers abandon it.
But there's a weird exception to this rule, actually. Most of those new words relate to air or medical contexts, but there's pneumatology, the study of spiritual beings.
Ah, yes.
It still has the silent P, but it feels completely out of left field.
Well, the Greek root meaning breath or wind was frequently metaphorically extended to mean spirit.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
But if you want to look at the absolute oddest consonant cluster that we bypassed, look at the word chthonic.
Oh, man, chthonic. C-H-T-H-O-N-I-C, relating to the underworld or the realm of Hades.
Try pronouncing a K sound, an H aspiration, and a TH sound in rapid succession right before hitting a vowel.
K? No, I can't.
It is brutal on the English palate.
It really is.
Yeah.
You know, if you hate that the first C gets all the attention on the page while the last C does all the actual work in the pronunciation, you can just use the alternate word ichthonian.
That is true.
I mean, it means the exact same thing, but it doesn't make that initial cluster any easier to look at.
It really doesn't. But, it wasn't just the Greeks that caused linguistic incompatibility. English also violently rejected a very specific sound used heavily by its immediate European neighbors.
Okay.
It's what linguists call the velar fricative.
You're talking about the back of the throat rasp.
Exactly. If we break down the Latin roots, velar refers to the soft palate at the back of the roof of your mouth.
Right.
And fricative means to rub. So you are literally rubbing air against the back of your palate. You hear it in the German word bush or the Scottish word loch.
And because that heavily textured sound isn't part of conventional English hardware today, whenever we borrowed words that featured it, we just eventually smoothed it out.
Precisely.
Like, the letters stayed, but the sound vanished. Take the word yacht, borrowed from the Dutch. That CH was originally a raspy velar fricative.
The Dutch jocked. English speakers couldn't handle the rasp, so it went silent.
Same with chutzpah, borrowed from Yiddish. It's famous for Leo Rosten's 1968 jocular definition.
Oh, I love this one.
The quality of a man who kills his parents and then throws himself on the mercy of the court because he's an orphan.
That perfectly captures it.
Right. But our standard dictionary definition is just supreme self-confidence or gall. But the spelling starts with a CH. In Yiddish, that CH stood for the velar fricative.
Yes, it did.
But English speakers just drop the rasp, turning the C completely silent and leaving us with just a standard H sound.
But the interesting thing is, this phenomenon wasn't restricted to foreign loanwords. This happened to native Old English words, too.
Wait, really?
Oh, yes. Words like night, light, sight, fright, and right.
Wait. We used to rasp our way through basic words like night and light.
We absolutely did. The Dutch and German ancestors of these words were spelled with a CH. So the medieval scribes, trying to write down Old English, they used GH to represent that exact same back-of-the-throat friction.
Oh, wow.
So night was pronounced with a heavy guttural rasp. Over centuries, as the English accent softened and shifted forward in the mouth, the pronunciation of that rasp vanished.
But the spelling stayed.
Yes, because the spelling had already been standardized by those early texts. The GH was left behind on the page, totally silent.
So the printing press basically locked in the GH just as the public was deciding they didn't want to make that sound anymore.
Precisely.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. While missing hardware explains foreign words, and the velar fricative explains guttural rasps, some silent letters are strictly a result of our physical anatomy forcing sounds to merge.
Very true.
Like the silence in words like rap with a W and write with a W isn't a phonetic mystery at all. It's anatomical.
It's all about the physical shape of your lips. In fact, I recommend trying this wherever you are listening. Form your mouth to say the sound ru.
Ruh. Okay, I'm doing it.
Now form your mouth to say the sound woo.
Ruh.
Both of those sounds require the exact same slight protrusion and rounding of your lips.
Oh, yeah, they really do.
Because your lip positions are physically identical, trying to articulate a distinct followed instantly by a distinct row in rapid succession is wildly inefficient.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. It feels terrible to say.
They are practically indistinguishable, so over time, the body found the path of least resistance. The W and the R simply melted together.
Oh, I see.
The W went silent because our lips were already in the required position for the R, and you see a similar anatomical simplification in words like knife, night, and gnaw.
With the silent K and G.
Yes. Hundreds of years ago, the initial K and G in those words were fully pronounced.
Knife.
Ka.
Right. It's exhausting for the mouth to transition from a hard stop in the back of the throat, which is the K or G straight, to a nasal continuation like the N. So eventually those sound clusters simplified into the single N sound.
So far, we're talking about the beginnings of words, but consonants melt away in the middle of words, too.
Yeah.
Especially the letter L in words like calm, palm, and talk.
Yes, to understand the disappearing L, we have to look at the difference between what we call a light L and a dark L.
Okay.
Let's do another physical test for everyone listening. Say the word lull.
The first L is a light L. You pronounce it at the front of your mouth, right behind your teeth.
Right.
But that final L is a dark L. To make that sound, you have to raise the back of your tongue slightly.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you really can feel the tongue shift backward for the second one. Lull.
Exactly. Now, when a dark L comes right before certain consonants, like an M or a K, it has a tendency to change the sound of the vowel before it, and then it physically melts into that next consonant.
So it disappears.
It does. That is exactly why calm doesn't rhyme with cat and talk doesn't rhyme with tack. The dark L alters the preceding vowel and then essentially vanishes into the M or the K.
But wait, if the dark L naturally melts into a K, why do we still pronounce the L in a word like bulk or sulk?
That is an excellent distinction. It depends entirely on the vowel preceding the L.
Oh.
With front vowels, like the A in talk or balk, the transition to the dark L and then the K is anatomically cumbersome. So the L drops out. But with back vowels, like the U in bulk, your tongue is already positioned closer to where the dark L is formed. It's a much easier transition, so the L survives.
So basically the physics of the mouth dictate the spelling.
Well, they dictate the pronunciation, and the spelling is just left holding the bag. It's also the exact same phonetic process that explains certain modern accents, by the way.
Really? Like which ones?
Well, in a Cockney accent, the dark L often turns entirely into a vowel sound. So a word like trouble is pronounced as trubo.
Oh, right. Trubo.
The L is completely gone, replaced by the vowel your mouth naturally forms when the tongue drops.
Okay, so biological efficiency explains write and night and talk. But, that natural evolution doesn't explain everything. Sometimes human beings forcefully intervened,
Oh, yes.
like artificially injecting letters into words based on terrible logic or social class.
The false analogy is a very powerful force in linguistics. Let's look at the words should, would, and could.
I actually noticed a massive discrepancy here when looking at the sources. The root of should is shall. The root of would is will. So, they both earned their L's.
Yes.
But the root of could is can. There is absolutely no L in can.
You're entirely correct. The L in should and would used to be pronounced. Back in the refined speech of the 1500s, they rhymed with gold and told, like the word shoulder.
Okay.
But then for whatever reason, the L naturally dropped out of pronunciation in the 1600s.
But people literally shoved a silent L into the word could just to make it visually match should and would on the printed page.
They did.
They manufactured a silent letter out of thin air just for aesthetic symmetry.
It's a remarkable example of how human psychology alters the natural path of a language. We wanted a pattern, so we forged one.
That's wild.
And we see a similar phenomenon with the ghost T in words like soften, hasten, fasten, and listen.
Wait, why did the T drop out of listen?
Well, listen comes from the Middle English word listen. Middle English speakers naturally dropped the T because it was physically difficult to pronounce when stuck directly between an S and an N.
So it's that path of least resistance again.
Exactly.
But often is a different beast entirely. Its root is oft, which we still actually use in compounds like oft repeated.
Yes.
So when they added the N suffix to make often, the T naturally fell away, just like it did in soften.
It did. But then something very strange happened in the 1600s. As the printing press rapidly expanded literacy rates in England, people began reading much more widely.
Right, more books available.
And they saw the T printed in often. And because they were navigating this newly codified written language, they started pronouncing it simply because it was there. It's a reading-influenced pronunciation.
So they basically peer-pressured themselves into pronouncing a letter that had already gone biologically silent.
Exactly. But there's a royal twist to this story.
Ooh, do tell.
Queen Elizabeth herself did not pronounce the T in often, and because the monarch dropped the T, it immediately became the prestige pronunciation.
Oh, I see. The aristocracy wanted to separate themselves from the commoners who were suddenly learning to read. Dropping the T became a class signal.
Precisely. It signaled that you learned your vocabulary in the refined halls of the court, not from sounding out words in a printed book.
That is so deeply petty.
It is, and that aristocratic preference survived for centuries. which is why dropping the T in often is still considered completely standard today, even though pronouncing it has also become a standard choice.
Okay, so if could was an accident of false analogy and often was a tug of war between the printing press and the queen, other silent letters were acts of pure, deliberate academic arrogance. Let's talk about the Renaissance scholars.
Ah, yes. The artificial evolution of the dictionary makers.
Yeah.
During the medieval period, English borrowed a massive amount of vocabulary from French. These words were spelled phonetically by the English based on how the French actually pronounced them.
Makes sense?
But later on, Renaissance scholars who were deeply obsessed with classical antiquity realized that these French words ultimately descended from Latin roots.
Right. So what does this all mean? They couldn't stand the phonetic spellings.
Exactly.
They wanted the English language to reflect its glorious Roman heritage, so they explicitly stuck silent letters into perfectly good French words just to make them look more Latin on the page.
They did exactly that. They shoved a P into receipt to reflect the Latin recepta. They shoved a B into debt and doubt to mirror debitum and dubiter.
Unbelievable.
They shoved a C into indict and an L into balm, and they had absolutely no intention of changing the pronunciation. We still say them the French way, but they permanently altered the spelling just to flex their classical education.
But how did that actually stick? Like, why didn't the public just reject the B in debt the same way they rejected the P in psychology hundreds of years later?
It all comes down to timing and gatekeeping. The Renaissance scholars were altering these words right as the first major English dictionaries were being compiled.
All right.
And standardized education was just taking root. The academics controlled the printing presses and the universities. If you spelled debt the phonetic French way, D-E-T-T-E, you were deemed uneducated by the elites.
Ah, so they cornered the market.
Yes. By the time the 19th century editor tried to force the P into psychology, literacy was already widespread and the public held the power to ignore him. But in the 16th century, the scholars held all the cards.
It is a striking contradiction. I mean, the way we vocalize debt and receipt reflects their French heritage, but the way we are forced to write them down reflects a distant Latin past imposed upon us by academic gatekeepers.
It's an excellent summary of the tension between spoken and written English.
It just makes so much sense now. So for everyone listening, the next time you get completely frustrated by English spelling, don't blame a trickster god. What you are actually looking at is a living museum.
Exactly.
Every silent letter is a relic. We're staring at borrowed Greek code we couldn't process, discarded Dutch rasps frozen by Flemish typesetters, consonants that physically melted together due to the anatomy of our lips.
False analogies.
Right, false analogies, tutor class signaling, and the massive egos of Renaissance scholars.
It truly is a living museum. And that actually leaves us with one final and perhaps slightly unsettling thought to ponder. If English spelling fossilized how people spoke and the mistakes they made hundreds of years ago, what is going to happen in our digital age?
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Today, typos, autocorrects, and internet slang are being permanently documented online every single second in quantities Capson could never have even imagined.
That's terrifying.
So what accidental misspellings from our time might become fossilized as the official, baffling silent letters of the future?